Good day, and welcome to Number Runs for Sleepy Wraps. I am Viv Govender. This week, we're going to focus on the South African budget, which was finally basically tabled this week. Then we will look at the situation between the US and South Africa. There was a delegation led by the South African President, Cyril Ramaphosa, to the US. There was a meeting between them, some South African celebrities, business people, and the US President. And if you haven't watched it yet, it was quite eventful, let me say, memorable meeting. And then in the AI tech segment, we look at Google's announcements this week and what it means for the company going forward. So let's start off by looking at the budget. So budget was put in front of Parliament this week after a great deal of delays. We didn't have the VAT hike that was feared when things were announced first a few months ago. Obviously, the DA and other members of the GNU out of the ANC prevailed and caused that to be removed. And we knew that was going to happen. That was, pretty much well advertised in advance. There were no new surprises here. The fuel tools levy went up, but considering the fact that the oil price is as low as it is and the rand is as strong as it is, it's probably going to mean that even with the fuel price hike, we're going to have a lower petrol price next month. So in a way, that's kind of like going to mask that pain. The one thing to be concerned about the budget is this. Look, the South African government's assumptions about growth rates for this year have been reduced to about 1.5% from just under 2%. The government basically still wants to do a lot of really expensive things, including health insurance, etc. These things are going to be, very difficult to fund, given the fact that it doesn't have this revenue source that it wanted to have, which was the VAT increase. In terms of what's been happening with regards to the South African economy over the last little while, we've had a number of false dawns. Firstly, when Cyril Ramaphosa became the new president, with the removal of Jacob Zuma, there was Ramaphoria, remember that? There was the GNU hike, towards the optimism that occurred after last year's election. But none of these things have translated into higher growth rates for the country. And that is the main thing. South Africa needs to be growing at about 4 to 5% at the very minimum, probably in excess of 5%, ideally, but 4 to 5% at a minimum in order to do something about our unemployment rate in any reasonable amount of time. Right now, we have the highest unemployment rate in the world. Our youth unemployment is, just off the charts. And growth rates in this country basically are not even enough to make up for the population growth that we are seeing at the moment. That means year on year, the average South African is getting poorer. We definitely are not producing enough employment to absorb new entries to the labor force. And all this translates into basically a situation in which there's lots of people that are dependent on government, and there's a government that can't collect enough taxes to basically support them properly. That's just the way it is. As we head into a future in which AI is probably going to be a bigger part of the world, we just had this week the head of the EU, Ursula von der Leyen, come out and say that their assumptions a little while ago, they were predicting human level reasoning for computers by 2050, and now they're saying 2026, 2027, next year, the year after, basically is a possibility, and they need to basically figure out how to handle this. But they are much wealthier countries. They are much high levels of employment and much stronger social welfare nets. In South Africa, we have extremely high unemployment, much higher than anywhere in the EU. We have weak social welfare nets, but pretty high compared to just the government's fiscus. And we are going to be experiencing the same kind of turmoil, if not in some cases more, than places like the EU, because the EU at least has a large internal economy that it kind of protect and allow it to get through a lot of turmoil. We're a much smaller economy. We're much more vulnerable to external forces, and that means that if the impact of AI is going to be as big as we think it's going to cause a huge amount of disruption. And even if we don't look at AI, look at other things, for instance, just the trend lines in terms of unemployment, the trend lines in terms of new people entering the workforce, the number of people depending on government, the number of people that are paying taxes. There was a report out recently that under 3,000 people in South Africa have net worths in excess of $50 million rands, not dollars, 50 million rands. 3,000 people, about 2,850 was the estimate from SARS, have a net worth of more than 50 million rands, 50 million rands. Now, 50 million rands is by no means a small amount of money. It's more than $2 million. But if you think about it, in a country as large as South Africa, less than 3,000 people, that's a very, very small number of high net worth individuals. If you look at the number of people in this country that pay the majority of towards taxes, income tax, it's a very, very tiny number of people. If you look at them towards the dependence we have on things like, for instance, good commodity prices and so on, and how that will impact our economy, very vulnerable. So if you're going to enter a period of higher economic instability, we don't have the resources to basically buffer people against that. And as you go forward, I think it's going to be becoming a worse and worse situation, because what this budget has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt is that South Africans at the moment are pretty much at the limit in terms of what they can afford in terms of tax payments. You can't increase that much more than this without some significant pushback by the country. Already you have the upper income levels paying 45% maximum tax rates. Already you are seeing avoidance of taxes, not evasion, but avoidance, where people are moving funds out of the country. There's been, of course, movements out of the country, people themselves, to places like Mauritius, Dubai, etc. That is all indications that the tax burden is getting to a point at which people are not willing to endure that tax burden, even for the privilege of living in South Africa. Then moving on to this, meeting, let me say, between Trump and the South African delegation. Now, upfront, let me put my priors for you. Is there a white genocide in South Africa? No. Is there a crime problem in South Africa? Yes. Are people that are isolated and seen to be quite wealthy more likely to be targeted? Yes. Okay, we have a high crime rate in South Africa, and if you are considered to be a wealthy person in a specific region and you are also living in an isolated property, you're probably more likely than not to be targeted by criminals. And that is why we do have a higher, murder rate among, farmers, especially white farmers, than you have among the general population, which in of itself is of the fact that we have a very high, murder rate in of itself, So by that kind of view, it does look like the white farmers are getting the short end of the stick, but I think that's more a function of the fact that crime is high, and then criminals tend to target people that are isolated and seem to be wealthier, and farmers are going to be both those groups. That being said, does the statements from South African politicians like from the EFF help us? No. You look at any international, support of South Africa that tries to bring up, this is not a white genocide or whatever. Someone just brings up Malema chanting "shoot the Boer." It kind of negates that, especially in a short, soundbite kind of format. So we probably don't have the situation that's being complained about, but the optics are not great. And I think that is quite bad for us, because the people that are out there promoting this storyline, people like Trump, etc., don't really care about the truth. They care much more about the optics. It's very easy for them to say, oh, you say there's no white genocide, you say there's no danger of discrimination, etc. What about this person chanting this in front of 100,000 people? Okay. What about these laws that are, BE laws, etc.? That is what the danger is. Now, how could Ramaphosa have handled this? Quite frankly, there's nothing he could have done that was better than what he did. He went in there, he was, you might say, pandering, some might say submissive, whatever you want to say. But look here, we are in a world in which the US is the largest economy. The US is essential for us. We can't afford to alienate the US president. Our economy, as you mentioned, is quite weak. If our president has to swallow a bit of dignity in order to basically ensure that we don't suffer the economic, travails of Donald Trump's wrath, unfortunately, that is probably the patriotic thing to do, as much as it might offend any South Africans, pride. And it does offend your pride to see that happen. But what the president did, what Cyril Ramaphosa did, was, I have to say, the thing that I can't imagine a better thing to have done for the good of the country, in terms of the actual material good of the country. What is done to the in terms of like the political perception internationally, etc. Like I said, this was a fight we could have had it very difficult to win. Even though the truth is one thing, the ability for us to go and argue the truth, given, like I said, the stats about death rates, the stats about all the videos about people saying things, etc. It's going to be very difficult to argue that in the kind of short soundbite media format that there is globally. And for the president to go out there, Ramaphosa, and do what he did in order to kind of protect the economy of the country, in order to basically, ensure that South Africans don't suffer from, for instance, increased tariffs, increased sanctions, who knows what else could be done. That is probably, the best thing he could have done for the welfare of South Africans, which is what the president's job is, and yeah, like I said, it doesn't feel right. It is unfair. But that's just the nature of global politics. Ukraine doesn't want to be invaded by Russia. That's life. When someone is more powerful than you, they do things to you in the international sphere, and there's no higher judge than the most powerful country. And the most powerful country wants to do something to you. Unfortunately, there's nothing much you can do about it. And that's just the politics and the world we live in. And maybe down the line, when the world changes a little bit, when other countries rise up a bit more, like China and India, etc. Maybe there's ability to get a coalition of countries that can match up. But at the moment, for the good of the South African economy, there's nothing much that could have been done. Now, moving on to Google's announcements. I thought the announcements made this week by Google's, like product, like, developments, etc., the I/O tools, speeches, etc., given by the company, were excellent. I have no doubt that Google is either up there among the best, or if not the best, in terms of AI software out there, and AI hardware, in fact, as well, because the TPUs, the transformer processing units, are revolutionary. Okay, and I do think that they do have a significant technical advantage in many areas. There's things that they can do that nobody else in the world comes close to. Things like Alpha Evolve, this program that they created that determines new algorithms and that kind of stuff. Like, one of the things they did was found a more efficient way to do matrix multiplication. I mean, you think to yourself, what is matrix multiplication? Why is it so important to find a more efficient way? Well, matrix multiplication is like a core, like hardware, tools function at the moment, or demand of hardware power in the world at the moment. Matrix multiplication is really important. That's how a lot of calculations are done, etc. If you could reduce that from 49 to 48, which is what they did, operations, that 2% or plus efficiency that you get is going to be felt around the world. This is the first time an improvement has been made on this algorithm in 50 plus years. And Alpha Evolve did this. Alpha Evolve basically improved like more than a dozen or so algorithms, better than the best available stuff we had before the program came out. And you may think to yourself, what does it matter if these algorithms are improving or not? Understand that computing is algorithmic. AI is algorithmic. If you basically can improve the algorithms, you improve the function of computers, you improve the function of AI, it makes huge impacts globally, and into the future. You try and quantify the impact that calculus, the invention of calculus, had to the world. It's once it was invented, it'll be used forever. If you find a more efficient way to basically do matrix multiplication and you eliminate one function out of 49 and go down to 48, that one function does not ever have to be done again for the rest of human history, or the human future. That will go on every single year for the rest of our existence, basically adding on to the productivity of the world. And like I said, there's like a dozen of these things that he did. So that is amazing. AlphaFold basically solved protein folding for pretty much every single molecule that we can envision or imagine. Certainly all the stuff that's involved in life. What is important to that? Well, if you know how to basically create all these protein molecules, you can create much better drugs. You can cut down the process of inventing new drugs dramatically. And again, once you have it, this is something that's going to improve our efficiency indefinitely into the future. Things like, for instance, the development of things like GNOME and so on, very important for material science, etc. So in terms of like the pure scientific stuff, Google is not just competing. Google is by far and away, in some cases, I would think almost the only player in these spaces. But the main thing about the company, the main thing that people are worried about, is how it is going to handle the switch away from search to AI. Because at the moment, I've used it. As I've gotten more and more used to AI, I've started asking it more and relying on it more and more. It's just become an indispensable part of my life. And the $20 a month I spend on Google Gemini is probably the best money I spent in the month. It's like how Netflix felt when it first came out, like 100 rands or so, and you get unlimited video compared to paying 1,000 rands for the other stuff that is available out there. The same thing here. The value proposition for me is insanely good. Now, is it good enough for me to go on and get the $250 version? I don't know yet, but I'm probably edging towards that thing actually myself. $250, it's around about 1,500 rands a month. It is not insignificant, but compared to the productivity improvement I get from just having the $20 a month version, it might be worth my time to do that. The other stuff that they are doing in terms of basically they demonstrated there, things like, for instance, the ability to use agents to do things for you, the ability to use specifically designed kind of subroutines, for instance, for trying on clothes. Very interesting. Many inventions from Google, many things from Google that were really good. The problem is this: the company makes about $100+ billion a quarter in terms of revenue. It's a money spinning machine, and the biggest part of the money spinning machine, in fact, in some cases, tools, many things it does as a company is like negative for profitability. The majority of its profit, maybe in more than all its profit, because it has to pay for the losses elsewhere, comes from that search engine. That search engine, where you basically type in those Google searches, that search bar, incredibly valuable. That is the thing that you're going to have to sacrifice if you pursue this AI model. Why? Because you have to go and change how that search bar works. You're going to have to change how people basically get information. And if you do that, maybe you get access to this new future of AI and everything becomes very, profitable going forward to the future of the company. But right now, the choice for Google is how much do we cannibalize usage of that search engine, the search bar, that little Google search engine, which, like I said, it's 100 billion a quarter in terms of revenue, and the majority, if not all, of its profitability. Okay, effectively. That is the innovation dilemma. Statements by Sundar Pichai basically seem to say that they understand that and they are willing to go all in on this. And statements by people like Sergey Brin. Sergey Brin and Larry Page, the two guys that founded Google and control Google still, because they have what's called super voting rights. That means their shares votes count more than other people's shares. They basically are really keen on AI. In many ways, perhaps too keen. Larry Page, for instance, has come out and said that favoring humanity over AI is speciesist, as it's a bad thing to favor humans over machines. So he's really all in on AI. Sergey Brin has pretty much gone back to work for Google, and he's actually involved in actually helping program the AI. That is something which is obviously focused as much as you can imagine for a person like that on AI. That kind of focus on AI makes me believe that Sundar Pichai is probably going to be forced, if he's in any way unwilling, to sacrifice search for AI, because that is what the founders want to do, and the founders basically have the money, and they also have the voting rights that make all the difference for Google, Alphabet, how you want to call it. And so initially the share price fell on the announcements, but since then there's been a sharp rise upwards as people try to finally realize just what of a dark horse Google is in this AI space. And we're not even talking about things like, for instance, Waymo, which I've talked about in the past. I think Waymo is, in the near term, the most disruptive technology we've experienced in our lifetime. More disruptive than phones, more disruptive than the internet. Self-driving vehicles are here. Waymo is the first to come into the market and really get that out there. Tesla seems to be following suit, but they aren't really out there providing millions of rides a month, which Waymo is doing. And I think that alone is going to make a huge impact in the world in the near term. Yeah, but like I said, Google, extremely interesting presentation, extremely impressive data technology, but extremely difficult decision to be made about how much to sacrifice search for AI. Okay, that's it for this week. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to speaking to you guys next week. Cheers.